The fall was not supposed to happen this way. My pod was spinning, alarms screaming in my ears, the sky outside turning from black to orange, to a blinding white, as the hull scraped against the atmosphere of a world I had never meant to visit. I gripped the controls with both hands, my claws digging into the metal, and I whispered a prayer to no one in particular, because the ground was rising fast and there was nothing left to do but wait for the impact. When the pod hit, everything went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any sound. Then pain arrived, sharp and immediate, spreading through my side like fire. I tasted blood in my mouth. Smoke filled the cabin. I tried to move my legs and found they would not obey me. Through the cracked window of my pod, I saw shapes moving toward me. Tall figures with strange armor, weapons raised, shouting words I could not understand. This was it. This was the moment my people had warned me about since I was small enough to be carried on my mother's back. Humans. The creatures from the old stories. The ones who wired captured minds into machines. Who fed on fear. Who wore mercy like a costume, only to rip it away once you trusted them. I had heard the stories 1,000 times, and now I was about to live them. The hatch of my pod tore open with a groan of metal. A hand reached in, gloved and steady, and grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away, but my body would not listen to me anymore. The pain was too much. The world tilted and spun, and the last thing I saw before darkness took me was a pair of human eyes, wide and searching, looking at me like I was something worth saving instead of something worth destroying. I woke up to a soft light and the smell of something clean. For a long moment I did not open my eyes, because I was certain that whatever waited on the other side of my eyelids would be worse than anything I had imagined. My people said humans kept their prisoners awake for days, forcing them to watch as their minds were taken apart piece by piece. I braced myself for chains, for cold metal tables, for the sound of machines preparing to strip away everything that made me who I was. Instead, I felt warmth. A blanket covered my body, soft against my skin, nothing like the rough fabric I expected from a species my people called monsters. I opened my eyes slowly and found myself in a small room with white walls and a single window letting in pale daylight. There was no cage, there were no chains. There was only a bed, a chair beside it, and a young woman sitting in that chair, watching me with quiet patience. She had short brown hair and tired eyes, the kind of tired that comes from long hours of work rather than cruelty. Her name tag read Ellie Bennett. When she saw me stir, she did not reach for a weapon or call out an alarm. She simply leaned forward slightly and spoke in a voice so gentle it confused me more than any threat could have. "You're safe now," she said. "You're at a medical station. My name is Ellie. I'm a nurse here. You were badly hurt in the crash, but we've treated your wounds." I did not understand her words at first, not until a small device on the table beside my bed began translating them into my own language, the sentences appearing as soft chimes of sound only I could recognize. Safe. The word felt foreign in my mouth even though I had not spoken it. Safe was not something my people associated with humans. I tried to sit up, testing the boundaries of this so-called safety, expecting straps to hold me down. There were none. My hands were free. My legs, though bandaged, were free. I stared at Ellie, waiting for her mask to slip, waiting for the moment she would reveal the truth my instructors had promised me about her kind. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice raw, the translator carrying my words to her in her own language. "You're on a research and rescue station near the border," she said. "Your ship crashed into our sensor range. We picked up your distress signal and sent a team out. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days. 2 days. 2 days in which I had not been dissected, wired, or destroyed. 2 days in which someone had cleaned my wounds and covered me with a blanket instead of leaving me to die in the wreckage." None of this matched the stories. I decided right then that this was simply the beginning of a longer trick, a performance meant to lower my guard before the real horror began. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice sharper now, testing her patience the way one tests the strength of a rope before trusting it to hold weight. Ellie did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. "Right now, we just want you to heal," she said. "After that, it's up to you. You can stay here as long as you need, or we can help you get in contact with your people once you're strong enough to travel." I laughed, a broken sound that hurt my throat. "You expect me to believe that? My people have stories about your kind, stories of prisoners who never leave your ships, stories of mines taken apart and used as fuel for your machines." For the first time, something shifted in Ellie's expression, something that looked almost like sadness. She reached for the translator device and adjusted it slightly, before speaking again. "I'm not going to pretend I know everything your people have been told about us," she said, "but I promise you, nothing like that is happening here. You're a person who got hurt, and we're trying to help you get better. That's all this is." I wanted to argue, to throw more accusations at her, to force the mask to crack, but exhaustion pulled at me, and the pain in my side had not fully faded, and despite every warning drilled into me since childhood, some small part of me wanted to believe her. I hated that part of myself in that moment. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me again, telling myself I would find the truth soon enough. The days that followed did nothing to prove me right. Each morning a doctor named Noah Bennett came to check my wounds, always announcing himself before entering, always explaining what he was about to do before touching me. He showed me every instrument before using it, holding up small devices for scanning my body, instead of forcing them onto me without warning. When I flinched away from a scanner on the third day, he simply set it down and waited until I nodded before trying again. I tested them constantly, searching for the moment their patience would break. I refused the food they brought, certain it was poisoned or drugged, watching their faces for any sign of frustration. Ellie only smiled gently each time, and one afternoon, before offering me a bowl of warm broth, she lifted the spoon to her own lips first and tasted it in front of me, showing me it was safe without a single word of explanation needed. "You don't have to trust us right away," she said, setting the bowl down within my reach. "But I hope one day you will." I ate that day, slowly, watching her leave the room afterward without asking for anything in return. No demands, no conditions. Just quiet care, offered again and again despite my hostility. The nights were harder than the days. The pain from my injuries worsened after dark, and with it came memories of the crash, of the fire, of the terror that had gripped me as my pod fell from the sky. On one particularly difficult night, I woke gasping, my body shaking, convinced for a moment that the machines had finally come to take my mind apart in my sleep. The door opened softly, and Ellie stepped inside, her shift clearly over, judging by the change of clothes she wore. She must have heard me through some monitor, because she came without hesitation, pulling the chair close to my bed and sitting down without a word. She held up the translator device so I could see her words as she spoke. "I know it's hard," she said, "being somewhere unfamiliar, surrounded by people you were taught to fear. I can't imagine how frightening that must be for you." I did not answer at first, too tired to argue, too afraid to admit how much her presence had begun to calm the storm inside my chest. Eventually, in a voice barely above a whisper, I told her everything. I told her about the stories my instructors used to tell, about minds wired into machines, about screaming used as fuel, about teeth and shadows and every nightmare shaped like a human being. I told her because some part of me needed to hear her response, needed to see whether the truth would finally show itself in her eyes. What showed instead was grief, quiet and real, the kind that cannot be faked by someone simply performing kindness for some hidden purpose. "I'm sorry someone told you those things," she said softly. "We're not that. I promise you, we're not that." I wanted so badly to believe her, and for the first time since the crash, I let myself imagine that maybe, just maybe, everything I had been taught was built on something other than truth. Over the following days, my body grew stronger, and with strength came curiosity. I began asking questions instead of accusations. Noah answered patiently, explaining how their station worked, how they treated injured travelers regardless of species, how disputes between different worlds were handled through negotiation rather than force whenever possible. He told me about a young engineer named Lucas Bennett, no relation to Ellie despite sharing a surname, who had once nearly lost his life helping a stranded alien crew repair their engine during a storm, refusing to leave until every last person was safely aboard a rescue shuttle. I listened to these stories with growing disbelief, not because they seemed impossible, but because they contradicted everything I thought I understood about the galaxy beyond my own world. My people painted humanity as a singular threat, a monster wearing many faces, and yet here I was, surrounded by individuals who each seemed to carry their own quiet kindness, their own reasons for choosing patience over cruelty. One afternoon, a woman named Grace Turner, the officer in charge of the station, visited my room for the first time. She was tall, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and she carried herself with the calm authority of someone used to making difficult decisions. I expected her to be different from Ellie and Noah, colder perhaps, more willing to show the truth behind the mask I still believed existed somewhere in this place. "I wanted to speak with you directly," Grace said, once the translator adjusted to her voice. "Your ship's wreckage has been recovered. We were able to identify enough of your ship's systems to contact a relay station near your people's territory. They know you're alive." My chest tightened at her words. Contact meant choices, and choices meant the moment I had both feared and hoped for since waking in this place. "What happens now?" I asked carefully. "That's entirely up to you," Grace said. We can arrange transport back to your people whenever you're ready to travel, or, if you'd like more time here to heal fully and see more of how we operate, you're welcome to stay. There's no obligation either way. I studied her face, searching for some hidden condition, some price attached to her offer. There was none, just a simple choice, laid out plainly, without pressure or manipulation. Why? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Why help me at all? I am not one of yours. My people are not your allies. There is nothing you gain from any of this. Grace considered the question for a long moment before answering. Because you needed help, she said simply. That's reason enough for us. It doesn't matter where you're from or what your people believe about us. If someone is hurting and we can help, we help. That's not a strategy. That's just who we try to be. Her words settled into me slowly, reshaping something I had carried since childhood. I thought of my instructors, of the fear they had planted so carefully in every lesson, every story, every warning about the monsters beyond our borders. I began to wonder, for the first time, whether those lessons had been less about protecting us and more about controlling us, keeping us small and afraid so we would never question the walls built around our world. That night, I asked Ellie a question that had been growing inside me for days. Why do your people help strangers so easily? Doesn't it frighten you, welcoming someone from a world that fears you? Ellie thought about it before answering, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. I think fear is easy, she said. It's simple. It doesn't ask much of you except to stay away from things you don't understand. Kindness is harder. It asks you to take a risk, to trust someone before you know for certain they deserve it. I'd rather take that risk and be wrong sometimes than live my whole life assuming the worst about everyone I meet. Her words stayed with me long after she left the room that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction since the crash, the tasted food, the explained instruments, the patience given so freely despite my hostility. None of it matched the monster stories. All of it matched something far simpler and far more difficult to accept, the idea that perhaps my people had been wrong, not through malice, but through fear, passed down so many times it had hardened into truth. Days turned into weeks as my body finished healing. I spent my recovering hours exploring the station under careful supervision, meeting more of the people who worked there. A young pilot named Sophie Carter showed me the small garden they kept near the station's observation deck, explaining how growing plants helped keep morale high during long assignments far from home. A quiet technician named Ryan Foster taught me simple words in their language, laughing gently at my mispronunciations without a hint of mockery, only encouragement to try again. Each new person I met chipped away at the wall my instructors had spent years building inside me. I began to understand that the stories were never really about who humans actually were. They were about control, about keeping my people afraid enough to never look beyond our borders, never question the leaders who benefited most from that fear. A frightened people is an obedient people, and obedience, I realized slowly, had always been the true goal behind every terrifying tale I had been taught since birth. One evening, Grace called me to her office, the same calm authority present in her posture as it had been during our first meeting. The relay station has received a message from your people, she said. They're requesting confirmation of your condition and asking when you plan to return. My chest tightened again, but this time with a different feeling entirely. Not fear of what awaited me, but uncertainty about what I wanted to say, what truth I needed to share with the people who had raised me on lies. I want to send a message back, I said. Can you help me record it? Grace nodded and arranged for the equipment, stepping back to give me privacy as I prepared to speak. I sat before the small recording device, my thoughts racing, trying to find the right words for a message that felt heavier than anything I had ever needed to say. When the recording began, I spoke slowly, carefully, choosing each word with purpose. This message is for anyone who still believes the stories we were taught about humanity, I said. I crashed on the edge of their territory, injured and afraid, expecting the worst. Instead, I was given care, I was given patience, I was given honesty, even when I did not deserve it because of my own hostility toward the people helping me. I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. They tasted my food before giving it to me, to prove it was safe. They explained every instrument before using it, and waited for my consent before touching me. They stayed by my side through long nights when fear kept me awake, offering comfort instead of punishment. None of this matches what we were taught. I do not know why our leaders built these stories, but I believe now, they were never about protecting us. They were about keeping us afraid, and a frightened people rarely question the walls built around them. My voice grew steadier as I continued. I am choosing to stay a little longer here, to learn more before I return home. I ask that anyone hearing this message consider the possibility that everything we believed might have been built on fear rather than truth. It is time we looked beyond our borders and discovered what is actually out there, instead of accepting stories designed only to keep us small. When the recording ended, I felt lighter than I had since the moment my pod first began its terrifying descent through the atmosphere. Grace entered the room quietly, her expression warm despite the seriousness of what she had just witnessed. "That took courage," she said. "Maybe," I replied, "or maybe it just took someone finally showing me the truth I was too afraid to look for on my own." In the weeks that followed, I remained at the station, learning more each day about the people who had saved my life without asking for anything in return. Ellie became something like a friend, patiently teaching me about her world, just as I taught her about mine. Each conversation chipping away further at the fear that had once defined every thought I had about humanity. Noah continued checking on my health long after it was strictly necessary, simply enjoying the company as much as the routine of care. Grace kept me informed of every development regarding my people's response to my message, never pressuring me toward any particular decision about my future. Eventually, a reply came from my own world, hesitant and uncertain, but curious rather than hostile. It seemed my message had reached more ears than I expected, sparking questions among those brave enough to ask them despite years of enforced silence. Perhaps change would come slowly. Perhaps some would never abandon the fear instilled in them since birth. But a door had opened, however slightly, and I intended to walk through it rather than let it close again out of old habits and older fears. I thought often about that first terrifying moment when my pod crashed and human figures approached through the smoke, weapons raised, shouting words I could not yet understand. I had expected monsters. I had expected cruelty dressed up as rescue, kindness worn only as a temporary mask before the true horror revealed itself. Instead, I found people. Flawed and imperfect perhaps, but genuinely caring in ways my own upbringing had never prepared me to recognize. The stories I grew up with were wrong, not because monsters do not exist somewhere in the universe, but because they had painted an entire species with a brush meant only to control rather than to inform. I had come expecting horror, and found instead something far more complicated and far more valuable, a kindness offered freely to someone who had done nothing to earn it, beyond simply needing help. And in the end, that lesson mattered more than any story I had ever been told, because it proved that fear, however carefully constructed, can never fully hide the truth from someone brave enough to look for it themselves.